everyone, welcome back to episode 3 of my Dork cast series. I'm very fortunate to have stayed in a Holiday Inn Express again recently, and again as my background, I've taken 1 or 2 whole Coursera courses on statistics, so I feel I have every right to speak on the subject as an expert in the field of data science. I've got with me Daniel Parton, who's the lead data scientist, which sounds awfully impressive, with the Bardess Group. So Daniel, tell me a little bit about your background. Do you have the high credentials I do of taking a Coursera course and staying at a Holiday Inn Express, or do you have some other background?
Hi Dalton. I mean, obviously I have a lot of good things to say about Coursera courses. I've done some myself, but my original background is in academia. So I did my PhD in the UK, and then came to the US, did a few years of postdoc before moving into industry, where I've been practicing as a data scientist for a few years now.
So as a lead data scientist, do you get that title because you've got the beanie cap in the group, or is it just because of like your PhD and your massive background in data science?
So my role at Bardess is more of I'm more of like the practice lead for the data science side of the business, because Bardess is a data consultancy. We do all sides of data consultancy, from data preparation and data visualization with Qlik, for example, and then I'm handling the data science and advanced analytics piece.
Fantastic. That sounds exciting. But do you have the beanie? That's the important thing.
Sure. Let's just say I have beanie. Let's go with that.
All right, you're not falling from that. You're from the UK. You're not going to play the game with me. I understand. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Bardess is a partner, as Daniel mentioned. They do an awful lot of things, and they are a tremendous partner of Qlik. Do a lot to show what we can do, both with ETL and data prep and modeling and building applications across a wide variety of industries. I personally started my relationship with them about 2 years ago, as the Zika epidemic was a really big thing. They produced a phenomenal application that's available out there. And if you notice here, they have a public-facing website that you can go out there. When the Zika app came out, I got involved with them, and I actually produced a YouTube video walking you through a demo. They've tremendously changed the application, but the data is still up to date if you want to go play with that. So I've got the link there if you screenshot that and can figure out how to magically type that in. So that's kind of the background of how I got started with Bardess. But as I've watched them over time, they continually add to this website. Well, they added an application one time called Market Basket Analysis. And based on my tremendous data science background, I associate market basket analysis with beer and diapers. So for those out there who haven't taken a Coursera course and haven't stayed at Holiday Inn Express like me, Daniel, when we talk about market basket analysis, why is beer and diapers the story that comes up most often?
Yeah, that's a good question, Dalton. So market basket analysis is basically a way of analyzing if somebody has, say, bought a certain item like diapers, what other items are they likely to have bought as well, such as beer. So there are other terms for this type of analysis, such as association rule learning or frequent item set mining. So that type of analysis can be used in different domains, but the classic application is basically looking at this basket analysis, looking at consumer goods which people are purchasing, say in a supermarket or something.
And so it's actually been out there. It kind of became famous when somebody recognized the pattern of beer and diapers in the shopping cart, and I think that's why it's been associated with that. But obviously, like you say, this has been around for a long time. Here's where the rubber meets the road and why I'm on the phone with you. Because if it was about beer and diapers, I wouldn't have a whole lot of concern. I did enjoy the app that you got out there, and for those, again, go to their public website and play with that app. I'm involved because I get an awful lot of calls. As a solution architect in the healthcare space, I get an awful lot of people with different health systems say, hey, can you show me patients that have A and B and C? sometimes these things are medications. I need to see patients that are on this med and that med and this med. More often than not, it's about comorbidity. They're saying, can you show me patients that have this condition and this condition and this condition? To which, of course, I always shake my head and I say, tell me why you chose those things. Of course I can show it to you. I need to know why you chose those things. Because the beer and diaper story isn't about somebody walked through the store, saw a whole bunch of guys walking down the aisle with beer and diapers in their cart. They looked at receipts not knowing beer and diapers appeared in the cart frequently, and they did that. So what I did was I picked up the phone and I called Daniel and I said, look, man, I've got a beer and I'm hoping to find a beer and diaper story of my own. I'd like to do a medical market basket analysis. I've got this data where I have patient records. I've got some date when some condition was discovered. The way that I put this data so that you'll have a context as we go forward in this Dorkcast is I had an ICD-9 code. Forgive me. I realize that we're on ICD-10. This is the same concept. Don't panic because you're seeing ICD-9. You get the idea. Those codes that are associated with some problem description. I've picked a couple of pretty simple ones here. And then those problems roll up into some category. So when we're going forward in the app and you're seeing category 1, that's the highest level. They roll up to these levels. And then when you see the word category 2 or problem, it means this. So the data was there as to when it was discovered, what the ICD-9 description code was, and then we're going to break those things out and not worry about the actual codes. So I've clipped this. One of the things you put in your application, which I thought was really neat, was you actually put the segment explaining this association rule learning. So were these associations the kind of thing that we would normally expect out of this type of data science?
Sorry, what was the question, Dawson?
So is this data that I have, when I called you and I said I've got this data, does this data fit pretty well with this association rule learning?
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a good fit in the sense that you have a data set which consists of diagnoses for patients. So, I said the classic application of association rule learning is say for like market basket analysis for a supermarket. In this case, instead of products, we're basically looking at diseases. So it's kind of the same thing in a sense. Like we're saying if somebody has one disease, which other disease are they likely to have as well? So yeah, so in that sense, it's kind of a pretty parallel sort of problem, like from a statistical point of view to the market basket analysis.
Okay, good. And that's why I love that little paragraph you put in to explain this, because I think it's important for people to understand. What I happen to have running through my head in trying to do this is simply because of my background. I break things down to the basics. It's just relationships. There's associations, whether it's healthcare associations, retail sales associations, financial associations, doesn't really matter. They're associations. So Daniel ran the data and gave me back basically a QVX file, which is an export, and I was able to read it in. And as I read the data in about these relationships, I got pretty excited. Now the yellow was not in Daniel's code. I brought that out simply to show you. So the yellow is my highlighting added, and I saw row after row where I saw vitamin D deficiency. And I says, oh my goodness, I just found my beer and diapers. Vitamin D is in a lot of carts, or it's associated with a whole lot of things. Clearly, I've just found a great thing for the world. But Daniel told me to calm down. And I was like, but why are you trying to squelch my thing? I see this on row after row after row. And he brought in this whole data science stuff. And so I've snapshotted this picture out. Daniel, I'm going to let you talk about these different aspects of it. But for everybody else, I've got this site down here. If you want to go, you'll be able to find these as well as many other data science terms. So Daniel, can you explain to me why you had to kind of calm me from just seeing rows of data versus these things, which is the data science about the data?
Yeah, sure. So this kind of goes into some of the subtleties of association rule learning. So I guess what you were seeing was associations which appear to have high lift. So the lift is basically saying that how frequent is an association compared to if all associations in the data set were completely random. So, you know, if every association within the data set was equally likely, then they'd all be equally likely, but some associations are going to be more likely than others or less likely than others, and we're particularly interested in this case in finding associations between diseases which are more likely in the data set. So that's the lift metric, but there are various different metrics you can calculate using association rule learning. And the other one which we focused on in this analysis is support, which is basically saying how often did the first disease in the association, how often does that appear in the data set. So I guess the issue you're running into is that you're seeing high lifts, but sometimes you can get very extreme lift values when support is relatively low. So if you've only seen disease A, like, I don't know, like 5 times in the data set or something, but you know, it might seem to be relatively frequent, but actually just because the support is so low, you're getting very extreme values. So that's why usually in association rule learning, you have to consider at least a couple of different metrics. So in this case, we looked at support and lift in particular. So a good approach is to look for associations with high lift, but also with reasonably high support.
Fantastic. So as background, what I did then when he's kind of slapped my hand, I was like, okay, great, I can do a scatter plot. So I went out and did a couple of scatter plots where I looked at lift and I looked at confidence and I looked at support and I did a couple of things and I was like, wow, I found this a couple of these out here that have pretty good confidence and they've got a pretty good lift score here, almost 3. And therefore, clearly, I need to run down this path, right? And unfortunately, I got to tell you, I got my hand slapped by Daniel again, because behind the scenes, what we had done the first time, we run this again a second time. You'll see this in a second. When we ran it the first time, I had asked Daniel to give me 3 outputs, show me diagnosis 1, 2, and 3. And as I tried to bring it into an application that I could show everybody for the demo, I said, oh man, 3 things is just too complicated, so I'll just pull 2. Well, that's not really a good thing. Because one of the things Daniel mentioned about it was it's looking at it as though the rest of the data was completely random. Well, if I start pulling and filtering on the fly, unlike traditional analytics, now these numbers lose their relevance. And so I was doing something completely wrong. And Daniel rightly called me out on it. So rather than shooting the video a while ago, we waited a while so that we could get things correct. One of the other things that I also did, I mentioned those categories. And we did it for everything. And I said, well, but in this case, I don't really want to look at vitamin D deficiency and compare it to other things that are in the same category. Similarly, you would say, well, that's just silly. Of course, sinus and sore throats and coughs are related to each other. Duh, Dalton. Why are you focusing on that at all? Like, that doesn't make sense. And so that was obviously a problem as well. And then he said, can you show me how from the data it doesn't make sense? How could you have shown me lift and confidence and lift and um, support because there's so many rows, you're only showing one. I says, well, I'm just taking an average. And he started laughing at me, kind of out loud, not going to lie. I guess my level of data science, I need to stay at Holiday and Express a few more times. So it turns out that what I tried to do with this data set that's like other normal analytics was bad. You cannot create cohorts after the fact or you're ruining the entire thing because all those other numbers that he presented have to do with the entire data set. So Daniel said, hey, why don't you leave the data science to me? And he took it back and he generated 4 separate sets of data. So can you explain these 4 sets of data that you ended up then generating?
Yeah, sure. So, the first data set was just taking the category 1 from the data set, which is like the high-level category for the disease, whether it's, say, a musculoskeletal disease or, I don't know, like a mental disorder or something. So we can look at interactions or associations between those, which is interesting. But we also want to look at individual diseases. That's 3 and 4. Those cover the individual diseases. Data set 2 is the lower level category of disease. So the difference between data sets 3 and 4 is that if you think about associations between 2 diseases, sometimes the association or the 2 diseases are going to be from the same category, like the same category 1. So you get a lot of like things where, I don't know, two mental disorders, like so let's say like 2 mental disorders might go together, or 2 gastrointestinal diseases might go together, and because of the way these diseases are categorized, sometimes those 2 diagnoses are actually like kind of from the same disease basically. So some of those pairs of diseases are not so interesting to look at. So that's why we created this additional data set, number 4, where we removed associations between diseases from the same category.
Fantastic. And so with that then being said, we got the data back and you generated this chart. This is one of the things, and this is a snippet from a version that I pulled down. And so we could be looking at all this data. Again, we've got values out there, but rather than just looking at it that way, you gave it to me in this really interesting diagram. What do you call this type of a visual, Daniel?
Yeah, this is known as a chord diagram. So the idea here is that the thickness of each chord, each chord is going between 2 disease categories here, and the thickness of the chord represents the lift value. So the thicker the chord, the higher the lift is. So, this is kind of a quick visual way to look for example, thick chords, which represent associations with high lift. So, associations which are particularly frequent in the data set.
Okay, so if I look at something like this here, as I look at this particular thing, if I looked here, maybe that stands out, but I think here this really stands out. What it's saying is there's a pretty good lift between digestive system disorders and blood and cell. Is that kind of an accurate way to look at that?
Yeah, that seems to be what it's saying in this case.
Okay. And when I look at something else like this, I can see there's a whole bunch of relationships but they're very small.
Exactly.
So that's good. So I love this type of a diagram. This is one of the hard things that's out there. So this is just touching just purely on pure data fluency, because it's hard, right? That understanding this kind of data, getting any kind of possible known associations or ideas of where to go, looking at raw data is really hard, right? This data science has been out there. Once you start joining it, though, with something like this that can visualize it so that you can see these things that should jump out at you, there's a huge relationship there, right? So that lift that Daniel mentioned, that's a great way to look at this. And this was the category ones. So one of the things that Daniel mentioned, he did run the data where the pairs differed. So if I look now at vitamin D deficiency, you'll notice it was an endocrine category, and that has been excluded. But that's excluded in the data set when he ran his numbers, not being excluded by me completely by mistake and get my hand slapped. Right? So as I look at this now, I would look at this and say, wow, there are an awful lot of things associated as other problems with vitamin D. That has an awful lot. Some of them are smaller than others, but man, there's an awful lot of these things. And so my initial assessment from looking, just from years of looking for pairs and looking for patterns, I think paid off. But there's a couple of these, if I'm looking correctly, then some of these really kind of jump out then. Am I looking at that correctly?
Yeah, exactly. Like vitamin D deficiency is a pretty interesting one here because it has so many different associations with other conditions.
Okay, very cool. And so I'm going to take this time just to kind of introduce the concept here. I am not a clinician. I joke about staying on Holiday Inn Express and taking a few Coursera courses, and I pretend to be a data scientist. That's why I bring experts like Daniel on. I am not pretending to be a clinician. I don't ever pretend to be a doctor. I don't even do that in jest because it's too important. But one of the things for those of you out here, I do want you to take vitamin D deficiency seriously. There are an awful lot of things related to that, so go and get that treated. It's personal for me. My wife has a vitamin D deficiency she's been diagnosed with. Several of these other things she's also dealing with. And so do take those things seriously, even though it seems so minor. If your physician tells you you've got a vitamin D deficiency, take that serious. It's not in fun. He's not just trying to tell you to take supplements. There's a reason. If you can stop that, you can eliminate a whole lot of other things. And so I went into there and did that, and then as I looked, I said, man, I've got all this original data, and this isn't data science. I'm going to let Daniel tell me if this makes sense after I present this. I went in and I took the dates and times of things, and I said, show me, calculate what came first, because I want to see if there's a causation or not. I would not be silly enough to say because these things are related, clearly this causes the other thing, right? That's not what the data science was at all. We're not saying if you've got this, this is going to happen. They could be, one could come before the other. So I ran this. And is that type of thing, if I'm looking for causation, Daniel, does it make sense to look at those dates? And if I find that one thing came before the other in terms of the dates it was diagnosed, does that timing, can I use that to talk about causation?
Yeah, so causation is a tricky thing in the medical world. It's pretty rare that you can determine that something is really like absolutely deterministically causing a disease, unless you're looking at things at the genetic level. But since we're looking at things on the higher level, just kind of broad statistics based on diagnoses. But clearly, like if you're seeing that one disease is coming before another disease very frequent, then it gives you a good idea that there's some likely causation there. I'm being very cautious here and being a good a good data scientist or something, and trying to avoid saying that this is going to be definitely a causal connection. But it's a good type of analysis to do for getting a good idea of whether something a disease may be leading to another disease.
Perfect, and that's why I wanted to bring this up. That's one of the things. Please don't ever go off and say you saw two things together, therefore one caused the other. There's That's not what the data science of the comorbidity that we'll talk a little bit more about Daniel's demo in a second. That's not what they're doing at all. When they see these things, it's a relationship. That's what we started with. There's relationships between these. Nobody ever said the diapers went in the basket before the beer did, or the beer went in before the diapers. The whole science is what's the relationship between these things. So the dates could help lead you towards something. In this instance, I happen to get lucky. Again, I am not a clinician, but as it turns out, vitamin D deficiency causes a shrinking in the valves, and guess what? That messes with blood pressure. So in this particular case, I got lucky, but be very careful when you're playing with these things and you start, if you were to try to use the words causation, you may end up having your hand slapped a few times like I did. So I've taken a screenshot here. This is something that you put in the application that you have out online, Daniel. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've kind of done here on this particular slide? And this is just a screenshot from their app, and we'll show you where to go in a second to get to that.
Yeah, so this slide we put in just to kind of highlight some of the insights that we found from analyzing the data in Click. We have a lot of other sheets in the app which show the data and show the chord diagrams and give you ways of kind of searching through the data and to find interesting associations. But these are like some of the things which we picked out when we were taking a look at the data. So for example, at the top we saw the highest lift that came out of our analysis was between vitamin D deficiency and malnutrition following gastrointestinal surgery. So, it's vitamin D deficiency again. This is something that pops up quite a lot in the data set. And so, I saw this coming up, but I would always want to check some secondary sources to really check if this is, whether this is maybe known to be an important association. And so, sure enough, I did some Googling and found a paper which says that vitamin D deficiency is a common complication of gastrointestinal surgery. Then secondly, another high lift we saw was between, anxiety and insomnia, which I think kind of makes sense. Like if a patient has insomnia, they're also likely to have problems with anxiety and vice versa. Then we saw tobacco abuse and chronic lung disease, which is obviously pretty well known today. But it's nice to see that with some quick analysis using Python and Click, we can draw this link between tobacco abuse and serious chronic lung disease, because people have been smoking since it became very widespread in the late 19th century, but it was a long time before many scientific studies came out with statistical analysis showing this link, and it was an even longer time before that became kind of socially accepted, I guess, the results of that type of analysis. And then finally, we saw a link between vitamin D deficiency again and osteoporosis. And again, this is, vitamin D deficiency is a known risk factor for osteoporosis. And there's a link there to a paper which kind of backs that up.
Fantastic. So I appreciate the time that you put into doing this and also finding these things. These things, those of you who are clinicians, you're like, well, duh, we've known about that for a long time. Guess what? Daniel and I did not know about these things. The whole point of this little episode was to show you that you could take data, run it through known scientific methods, and find the relationships between these things. And it turns out that the things that popped off the charts for us based on the data science were indeed known clinical things. The bigger thing then becomes, this is the data from this data set that's a sample data set. They cannot take this and say this is the same thing in their health system. Is that right, Daniel?
Yeah, exactly.
So that gets into this application is available right here at this website. I put this in really big letters, so hopefully this will be easy enough for you to find. You can go out and play with this. But more importantly, you may be thinking to yourself, man, I want to run this against my health system's numbers. Or maybe you're a payer and you want to run this against your populations and try to find out things that maybe as a payer, what are the relationships that are higher in different regions or communities of this country? There's big talk about social determinants of health. Could you run these at census tract levels to then see how do these things relate to that socioeconomic status or these other social influences of health? So Daniel, if somebody does want to run this with their data, I'm assuming they can just reach out to you at your email address?
Yeah, exactly. We'd love to help with any kind of project. If it's medical data, then great. But obviously, Market Basket or association rule learning can be used for many different types of analysis, and it's the classic application of Market Basket analysis. So for this one, we did the analysis using Python. There are different tools that can be used for that kind of thing, but the basic workflow is that we did the analysis in Python, and then kind of built this quick app to visualize the data, and Dalton helped out a lot with that.
And for those of you who may know Python or be playing with Python, I thought it was pretty interesting. As I was talking to you and your other data scientist there, Philip, you mentioned, I think you mentioned like it was an open library?
Yeah, that's right. We used an open source library called Orange. It's an interesting time in the data science field right now because most of the kind of core packages which people are using are open source. It's a little bit different from other kind of fields in industry, I suppose, where there's maybe traditionally been hesitation to use open source solutions. But in the data science community, the types of machine learning and statistics tools we're using benefit a lot from open source communities. And I guess like our strategy is often taking these open source tools, but then working with enterprise vendors who provide like a level of support and security and all the things which are necessary to productionize an enterprise solution.
Fantastic. I thought that was really neat. It's amazing to me how things are progressing and how open this is all becoming. Daniel, again, I sure appreciate your time. I appreciate Bardes as a partner. I appreciate the time that you and Philip both have put into this, and the application you've created. I think far past my wildest dreams for what the application itself would end up looking like, both visually and in terms of content. I just had this theory that, man, if we could take the same kind of things that the rest of the world is using and apply them towards healthcare, we could find out some neat things. You guys certainly did that. I encourage everybody, go hit this site and look at the apps, whether it's the Zika app that you might be interested in, if you're still interested in tracking that, or looking at this comorbidity analysis. Great stuff. You guys have done great things, and definitely reach out to Daniel if you're looking at doing these kind of projects to see what it would look like with your data and with other things. The biggest point I want to make, when you read books or you see things on social media about data science this, data science that, break the thing down into what it means. It may be about resources. It may be about relationships. You've got those same things in your healthcare environment as well. Daniel, I hope you have a great day, and everybody listening, I hope you enjoyed this, and this is proving valuable for everybody.
Okay, thanks, Dalton. It's been great working with you on this. It's been a fun project, and I'm glad we got some good insights out of it.